Could you tell us your name, please?
Mary MacEwan.
And you recently had a very big birthday.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it was my 100th birthday, and it was April 19th, 1912. I mean, that's when I was born. And I had all my friends come in the afternoon, and we had a great time.
And you've been living here in Tucson, Arizona for
About 50 years.
About 50 years. So you've known a lot of people here and been involved in a lot of things. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you've been up to here in Tucson over the years?
Well, the main thing I've done is work with an organization called the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And it's an international organization, although most of it is in the United States, I think. And as you can tell by the name of the organization, our work is mainly about peace and freedom. But however, I've retired from that, and they're still going strong. Or at least they're growing. I'm not sure how strong they are. But it has various projects that it tries to do something toward bringing about peace in the world. And if you want me to tell you now, the kind of thing that I have concluded is the way to bring peace, I can do that, or I can tell more about.
Yes, go right ahead. That'd be fine.
My thinking was that our demonstrations and appeals to the people in authority in the world never seem to really be effective. And so I began to think of another way of looking at it is, if you compare it to war, if you compare war to a disease, you realize that it used to be that before they knew much about diseases, that is over 100 years ago, they felt that just treating the symptoms of a disease was enough, but it didn't work. And the only way they were able to do anything about diseases was to find the cause of the disease. For instance, for whooping cough and measles and smallpox, they finally found what it was, what germ it was that caused the disease, and they were able to treat it from that point of view. Now, what is the cause of war? And I've tried to figure that out, and I've decided that when mankind first became man, descended from monkeys, they had to find food to exist. And sometimes they had to fight they had to fight each other for getting enough food to live. And I think that instinct of having to fight for something, that in the early times, that was just to live, that I think maybe that instinct is in everybody now. That is especially more in men than in women, but anyway, it's an instinct. Plus, let's see, now there's some other feelings, but that comes to the first feeling, and that involves sometimes killing people who interfere with your trying to get everything you want. And I'm afraid that's what happens with war. That it's, the United States, for instance, wants to control the world. They have to fight in order to get control of other countries. And of course, if you could get that instinct away from mankind, that would be a way to get peace. Now, I was thinking, my own feeling is that if you would bring up children, bring up babies, so they would not have to fight for what they want. They wouldn't have to cry a long time in order to get food from their mamas. That would be the best way to make them peaceful. In other words, to treat infants and small children with a lot of respect and love, not harshness and not scoldings, but giving them the example of being thoughtful and loving toward each other. That it takes a while. Little 2-year-olds will often fight in order to get a toy that they want. And it isn't that they're evil or that that's evil, it's just that you have to be able to give them as much as they really want. It's a little bit complicated, but I really think that's the route of making people not want to go to war. Well, I've tried to treat my own children the way I'm describing, and it's true that they are against war, and I don't think would ever take part in a war because of having been treated so well in getting everything they need and want. And of course, the person that I think of who's living today is an important person in history is Nelson Mandela. He is an example of someone who believes in people being peaceful toward each other. But I'm really not clear about all that, but that's the only person I can think of who everybody knows about, who leads that kind of life, the kind of life where he's kind to everybody.
What other historical figures have inspired you in your life?
Well, of course, there's Gandhi. Of course, there was Jesus. There's Buddha. Buddha, from what I've heard about Buddha, he was born and raised in a peaceful family. And when his father thought that he didn't know anything about poverty and suffering, that he should introduce him to it. So he took him on a trip through the poor parts of India. And Buddha was so disturbed and upset by what he saw that he spent his life trying to do away with poverty and doing away with the suffering that goes along with poverty.
So you've lived most of your life in the United States.
Yes.
And you lived where in South America?
British Guyana.
And how long were you there for?
A year.
And why did you go there?
My husband got a job teaching at a new university there. This was in 1965 or something like that.
And what was that experience like, living there?
Oh, it was great for me. I mean, it was a new experience and a lot of good things about it.
So, and tell us a little bit about your husband.
Well, my husband, as a young man, was trying to figure out what he wanted to do as his profession. And he went in his college courses, he realized that one of the most interesting and maybe helpful things is to find out what's at the root of all life. In other words, the cells. And in fact, he was what's called a microbiologist. In other words, it was in the field of botany, but it was about what made plants. What made up plants are the same thing that makes up people. In other words, cells. I think I've got it right. And so that's what he was.
Where did you meet?
We met at a consumers cooperative meeting in St. Louis, Missouri.
Is that where you were living?
Yes, I was living in St. Louis.
And where were you raised, Mary?
In St. Louis.
In St. Louis, okay.
We always lived simply, so it wasn't hard, especially in those days when prices weren't high. It wasn't hard for him to, and he got scholarships and things like that. And he finally got a PhD in biology or in botany. But one of the fields of botany is microbiology. And that's really what he was, more than understanding about flowers.
And you raised 2 sons.
Yes.
And what are their names?
Andy and Arthur. I started with very radical political views because my parents, especially my mother, was very much of a pacifist. And of course my father couldn't be as open about it as she was, because he was a lawyer and was able, in fact, when he defended somebody, this was during the First World War, and I remember one time he defended a man from Germany, and he was criticized very severely for defending anybody connected with Germany.
And did that create what sort of problems
well,
for your...
I don't think it got beyond just being an article in the paper.
So he was publicly criticized for his...
Yeah. The paper, I think, took the position that it was odd for a person to be criticized, for a lawyer to be criticized for defending a man from Germany. But now that I look back on it, it shows how ridiculous it was, and how ridiculous it is now for people. In those days, it was ridiculous to be anti-German, and now it's ridiculous to be anti-countries in the Middle East. People who are Mohammedans, or is that what they are?
Muslims?
Muslims.
Yes.
Yeah, it hasn't gotten to be as bad as it was then.
Now, you have a little story about women's suffrage, right?
Oh, yeah, that was when there was a big to-do about getting women the right to vote. And it was in 1918. And I remember walking down the street in a parade holding on to my mother's hand while we were in one of the suffrage parades and of course they did win out. Not from that particular parade, but that movement won out. But it was in 1918, I think. Women got to be full citizens. Up until then, women would not be able to vote.
Is that one of your earliest memories of that type of...
Yeah,
and
of that type of thing.
And what other, I know you've lived a long life, and so there's many experiences, but are there other experiences that sort of stand out for you that maybe help were formative experiences and
well, I remember
during your lifetime?
My father jokingly saying to my mother when we were on an automobile trip and we passed VMI, Virginia Military Academy. Yeah, I think it's
Institute.
Institute, yeah. And he said, now don't forget, he called her Elsie, don't forget, Elsie, behave yourself when we pass. And so she behaved herself. But at that time, this was, even after women got the right to vote, things like there'd be a drinking fountain someplace, and it would say for colored people, because they weren't allowed to drink at the places where, and of course it took a long while before they were able to eat in restaurants, that is in the same restaurants as white people. All that, I think, was after women had the right to vote. But there was plenty of leftovers, and there still are leftovers.
Once you left Guyana,
well, we came back to Portland, Oregon, and then my husband got various jobs. They were all teaching jobs at universities and things like that. I say maybe one or two. I can't remember. I'd have to sit down with my pencil and paper, figure out which ones came next. He also taught at a preparatory school. And with being a product of my parents, I also was anti-church, anti-religious. And my son told me one time that he ran into some of his classmates at from this school where my father had taught, a boarding school. And he was so grateful that from my father he learned about other ways of living without being a church person. One of the things that was interesting about living in Guyana was it was such a small country that we got to know Jenny Jagan and his wife, Janet Jagan, and they were, wonderful people, but of course there were plenty of people against them because they were for what we call socialism or communism. And one of the things that Janet Jagan drove her own little car, and they were very much against that because she should have had a chauffeur from their point of view, because that gave that chauffeur a job. And she was depriving somebody of a job by driving her own car.
Now let me ask you, Mary, Mr. Jagan was the president?
He was the president.
Of French Guyana?
No, English. It was British.
British Guyana, I'm sorry. Okay.
But during the time we were there, they became just plain Guyana. Of course, it was England and the United States cooperating on making sure that they were very pro-American.
And Janet was like the first lady, in other words.
Yes.
And where was she from?
Chicago. I thought of another story that I thought was completely unrelated except about the subject of peace and war. And that was, we were driving through Montana with our children who were then about, 4 and 6 years old. And the younger one looked out the window and saw all the little Indian children in this town. It's a town that's 90% Indian, American Indian. And he said, look, these children, they don't have to pretend they're Indians because they already are Indians. He thought that was a wonderful thing. You didn't have to have a game because it was a real person.
Who have been some of your favorite authors?
Well, Mark Twain was my favorite author. And I still feel that way about him.
And why so much did you like Mark Twain?
Well, I like reading out loud to my children Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer books. And I remember the one that even now when I think about it, makes tears come to my eyes, and that is when Jim, I think, on the raft going down the river, he said he was reminiscing about his own life, and he was saying that one of the things that he remembers with sadness was that when his little girl was coming out the house, he said to her, "Shut the door." And she didn't shut the door. And he said it 2 or 3 times, and she didn't observe him, and he got angry. And then he found out in later years that she was stone deaf and had been born deaf. It bothered him that he had been angry at her for not shutting the door. And for that story really stuck in my mind.
Are there any other authors or movies or other aspects of the arts in particular that have been important for you?
I always like the ones that are political, and like the Michael Moore movies. In fact, I keep intending to get the tapes of the ones I've missed. And I think maybe he's working on a movie now, because you don't hear much about Michael Moore anymore.
And you've met Amy Goodman, of course. We have the...
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I went to a party they had for her in Tucson about 10 years ago. That's how I met her. And of course, I listen to her every day, 5 days a week, because I think she has the, tells the real story, which other stations don't tell. And the interesting thing to me, and the reason that you begin to doubt, although very few people think about it, the other stations don't mention the name Amy Goodman. And yet, I'm pretty sure has the most listeners of any commentator. But she tells the truth, and that's what other stations don't want to do.
Do you listen to any of the other mainstream or corporate media?
No. No, I mean, I listen to things. I have a very hard time finding the kind of station that I like, although I think I could use my computer more than I do. I always expect to find some good things on regular television, but it's very hard.
How do you find people in general in this country these days, now as compared to many, many years ago? Do people seem to be, in general, becoming more or less educated or more aware of what really is going on?
I think people are more aware. Most people have their minds already closed, but when they don't have their minds closed, they begin to think sort of the way I think.
And so you see some hopeful signs.
Yes.
And is there anything you'd like to elaborate about that in terms of what's going on?
I claim that when people aspire to be president or some other important office, they know that if they are really open about what's right, which might not be on the same side as wealthy people, they know that that's a dangerous thing, because when you look at history, the people who've been assassinated or put in prison or at least fired from their jobs were people who take the position that I take, and that other people who want to change things take. So it's a very difficult problem on how to do things, or how to handle your thoughts and your opinions in order to remain alive and to remain out of prison. I feel that all of us should take the same position as Buddha or Nelson Mandela took, and that we should figure out some way, and I think they are beginning to figure it out, how to avoid getting hurt by expressing your opinion and doing something about it. That people should be able to do as much as possible. That is, the things that are peace-loving, and see if they can get away with it. Okay.
Thank you very much.